Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
My Nerd World.
And welcome to it, Depeche Mode, the podcast. I'm your host, Jon Justice. Thank you so much for checking out this week's episode. Back from vacation, ready to talk DM with you. TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. You can follow me on social media at @TheJonJustice. If you're on TikTok or Instagram, at @MyNerdWorld on X. Spent 9 days in Southern California, where I was born and raised, where I fell in love and was first introduced to Depeche Mode. Spent one of those days driving around basically my old stomping grounds of different areas where I'd grown up in Southern California and where I'd gone to school in L.A. County, L.A. and Orange County. And there's something about Southern California that just brings about all those nostalgic feelings of Depeche Mode. And all those times growing up, driving around in my 54 Volkswagen oval window, initially listening to Depeche Mode in high school, to my 64 Volkswagen Squareback, with my stereo, listening to my recorded cassette tape of a couple of songs from Ultra when the band showed up on K-Rock radio, getting a promotional copy before that of songs of faith and devotion. I mean, the stories of me driving around Southern California and Los Angeles listening to Depeche Mode could take up a couple of different podcasts. So it was fun to be back in the place where my love of the band was born. Planned on getting out to the Rose Bowl. Wanted to get a shot in front of the Rose Bowl, especially since we just passed the anniversary on June the 18th of the Rose Bowl. Music for the Masses, of course, 101 show. Unfortunately, just given the time frame and what I needed to do during my vacation, I wasn't able to make it all the way over to the Rose Bowl. But it was a fantastic vacation nonetheless, and I'm incredibly thrilled to be back doing the podcast again this week. Now, as I've been reporting on the show, nothing but silence out of the Depeche Mode camp, apart from the few photographs that float around from individuals who have run into Martin or Dave in various places around the globe. I think I mentioned it on the podcast 2 weeks ago, but this video that popped up of, I believe, I think he was in France, and it was Dave, and he was being accosted on the street by fans and just wanted to be left alone, and people were shoving things in his face to sign autographs, and he just said, "Hey guys, I just want to be out and enjoy my day," and I really felt bad. I can't imagine any of you listening to the show would have ever have done that, because any fan of Depeche Mode who really understands and respects this band, I can't imagine would have done that. You could see the look on Dave's face in the moment that he, as he was walking up to individuals who were yanking out their phone, he just simply didn't want to be bothered. So, apart from the smattering of video footage and photographs that people have seen of Martin and Dave out in public, there's been nothing but silence coming from the band at this point in time. Nothing with regard to those 4 produced tracks from Momento Mory or the live physical release of the Memento Mori tour. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about physical releases on next week's show. But for this week's show, I found an article. Came out about a year or so ago. But Ultimate Classic Rock, they put out a list of what they determined to be the best song off each Depeche Mode album. So what I decided to do was go through the list and their justification and then share with you what I think is actually the best song off each Depeche Mode album. I agree with some of their takes, and I disagree with most of their takes. As always, so much of this is subjective. Although with this particular question, though, there is a bit of objectivity attached to this, because depending on what your definition of the best song off each album, I suppose you could probably spin that into the most important track off each album, which I think would create and generate a completely different list. For the sake of listener feedback this week, though, I just want your thoughts on what you think the best song is off each album. Because I do, in my view, the best and most important, those are two separate categories. And this is a little less subjective. Just overall, what do you think the best track is off every album? It may not potentially be your favorite, okay? But just what the best song is. Let's go ahead and run through this list from Ultimate Classic Rock. Starting with Speak and Spell in 1981, Ultimate Classic Rock says, and I'll dismiss with saying the name of the website moving forward, they say it's just can't get enough. Writing on their debut album, Depeche Mode was still searching for their identity. Speak and Spell didn't offer much of a glimpse of what the band would become, but it did deliver their first hit. With its infectious synth line and bouncy rhythm, Just Can't Get Enough still ranks among the catchiest tunes in the band's repertoire. Sure, purists argue that it's not true Depeche Mode. The song is downright ambulant compared to the group's later and darker tracks, but there's still no denying its appeal. So I think they put forward a good argument here relating to Just Can't Get Enough, and certainly the band, I would think, has a level of agreement in that, since it's one of the few tracks, if not the only tracks, that they continue to sort of go back to, given its popularity and being the first major hit that kind of landed the band in the public zeitgeist. That being said, my pick off Speak and Spell for the best song is Photographic. I think Photographic is just, in terms of being the best song on the album. Now, it's not a song that I particularly go back to often. That being said, I don't go back to Speak and Spell very often. It would have been easy for me to sort of roll with, and I did think about it for a moment, Dreaming of Me or New Life. But Photographic, which is a song that I know the band has revisited and talked about using in the recent past. I mean, we're talking decades, but still more recent past in terms of any discussion the band has of a song off of a Speak and Spell. But I just think Photographic, the energy behind it, how it's darker than most of the other tracks on the album and fits in better overall with the band's catalog than Just Can't Get Enough. I just feel it's a much stronger track than Just Can't Get Enough. A Broken Frame, 1982, they chose Leave in Silence. Generally speaking, Depeche Mode's sophomore album was a letdown. I disagree with that. Still, they write, it marks an important transitional release in their history as the band started indulging their gloomier elements rather than sticking to the shimmering pop of their debut. It's an album of growing pains, to be sure, but several songs point to where the group would go next. I would actually make that similar argument relating to Photographic. Such is the case with our pick, Leave in Silence, a track which toes the line between Depeche Mode's light and dark sides. Now, I don't necessarily have a problem with this pick, and I think that if you had asked me what I thought the best song was off this particular album without providing me with an example beforehand or your choice, I may have gone with Leave in Silence. However, I'm going with Sun in the Rainfall. I think that's an incredibly strong track, so much so that we were teased to potentially get it live on this last tour, and I think, unfortunately, for most of us, we didn't get it live. I just feel that song, while it's not as indicative of where the band would go moving forward, again, I just feel that overall it's a stronger track than Leave in Silence. So again, as we move through this, what do you think? TalkShowNerd at gmail.com as my computer screen decides that it wants to crunch. I've been using, just as a side note, before we get to construction time again, I've been using this same, I'm on Mac equipment, apart from my podcast studio, that's on a regular PC. But everything that I use is essentially Mac. And I've been using text edit for my podcast that I do, for the Depeche Mode one and my Star Wars one. It's the same text edit file I've been using for years, and it's there's so many different gremlins in the file Like, I would love to see what the actual code attached to it looks like, because I've been using it and have done so many edits of it for just a number of years. Probably I hold the record for using the same text-to-edit note for this length of time. All right. From Construction Time again, Ultimate Classic Rock. They chose Everything Counts, writing. On their third album, Depeche Mode further evolved their sound, adding industrial elements to their arrangements and delving into politically charged lyrics. The song that best exemplified this move while also maintaining the group's commercial appeal was Everything Counts. The lyrics tackled corporate greed, while the tune also notably featured vocals from both Dave Gahan and Martin Gore, a dynamic the band would use to perfection in the coming years. When it comes to their choice from Construction Time again, I wholeheartedly agree. Everything Counts is easily the best track on that album. Some Great Reward, 1984. They went with People Are People. I have thoughts. Here, they write, here's where the discussions really get tough. Depeche Mode's 84 LP, Some Great Reward, features several of their bona fide classics, any of which could be reasonable picks. Smart move, Ultimate Classic Rock. Blasphemous Rumors is an emotional ballad. And while the sexual charge of the BDSM-inspired Master and Servant is enough to make even the wildest among us blush, still our choice is People Are People, an instantly memorable tune that addresses the topic of racism. Increasingly, the band soured on the track, despite People Are People becoming a global hit. Gahan and Gore expressed regret over the song, suggesting it was too commercial. They haven't played it live since 1988. All right, so I'm going to cheat on a couple of these, okay? So for my pick, I'm going with Blasphemous Rumors. That is an epic song, and I think it was and is a really good indication of where the band would be going, especially with Music for the Masses and Black Celebration as well. I think Blasphemous Rumors is quite easily the best song off Some Great Reward. Now, they are correct. There's several bona fide classics on that. As a quick side note on there, I really, really, really enjoy If You Want. And If You Want is still a track that I listened to going into every single weekend. Now, it's tough. I'm very hesitant to go and commit to it being the best song on the album. Maybe closer to my favorite song on the album, so perhaps this is a bit of a cheat. I'll give it to Blasphemous Rumors, but I'm going to put a close second in there for If You Want, because I think that song is incredibly underrated. Moving on to Black Celebration, 1986, they went with A Question of Lust, writing, opinions on Depeche Mode's fifth studio album are polarizing. Interesting. Some, including Nine Inch Nails' Trent Reznor, cited as hugely influential in the industrial and electronic genres. Others, like most critics at the time of its release, pan it as a stylistic misfire for the band. I have personally never heard that before. If you have any insight into that particular era and anything relating to that, I've never heard that before. I mean, I've always thought that Black Celebration was a rather well-beloved, if not one of the favorite albums by fans, until we end up getting to some of the albums that are released afterwards. Needless to say, they go on to say, regardless of where you stand, A Question of Lust emerges as the LP's strongest track. An anthemic tune twists and turns around Martin Gore's voice, here handling lead vocals for just the second time on a Depeche Mode song. Odd choice, honestly. And I haven't really pointed out the fact that I'm pulling from a website called Ultimate Classic Rock and talking about Depeche Mode, which to me is just odd in and of itself, even though I know that in the standards of classic rock, Depeche Mode is somehow falling into that category right now. But relating to that being the strongest track on the album, while I love A Question of Lust, I honestly would have sort of immediately defaulted to Stripped. When we get into the favorites category, that's where I can, go and make comments relating to Fly on the Windscreen or Black Celebration itself, or certainly Here Is the House. But in terms of the best song off the album, I personally think that would have to be handed over to Stripped. But as we move through this, again, whatever your thoughts are, your choices, email talkshownerd@gmail.com. Music for the Masses, 1987. They went with Never Let Me Down Again. Depeche Mode's history cannot be written without mention of their drug use, specifically cocaine and heroin, which plagued members of the band for more than a decade. Never Let Me Down Again channels some of that experience into incredible art, a soaring and twisting song that captures the euphoria of being high. Gahan sings about watching the world pass us by and never wanting to get his feet back down on the ground, but blissfully embodying the song's theme of escapism. I agree with that portion of it. Yet the tune manages to remain haunting and ominous throughout, reminding listeners that the high could come crashing down at any moment. I don't necessarily agree with the take on this being exclusively about cocaine, heroin, or drug use in general. While certainly the ambiguity of that song can lend itself to it, I think there's enough ambiguity to it to where you could apply it to a lot of different things relating to life. That being said, I do agree with their assessment of Never Let Me Down being the best song off of Music for the Masses. Could make an argument for Behind the Wheel, and even though the band doesn't like it, Strange Love as well. But I think ultimately between those, from those three tracks, I think Never Let Me Down certainly hits the mark as best track on that album. Violator, 1999. They chose Personal Jesus. Choosing a favorite track from this 1999 masterpiece is like picking a favorite child. Violator is so loaded with quality material that World in My Eyes and Policy of Truth, two songs which could have easily been chosen if they were on some of the band's other LPs, didn't even garner serious consideration. Instead, the choice comes down to Enjoy the Silence versus Personal Jesus, the battle between arguably the two strongest tracks in Depeche Mode's entire catalog. At the end of the day, we opt for Personal Jesus, a forebodingly catchy tune with its instantly recognizable guitar riff. More than 30 years later, we still want to reach out and touch faith. I agree with the assessment of the writer on this particular case. That being said, I would have gone with Enjoy the Silence. And that's probably more of subjective personal preference on my part. I just feel that of the two, it is a better song. That being said, anybody choosing Personal Jesus, I'm not going to argue with either. Songs of Faith and Devotion. They went with, unsurprisingly, Walking in My Shoes. The grunge revolution didn't hinder Depeche Mode's success the way that it did many other acts who rose to fame in the 80s. Part of that was due to the band's distinctive electronic tinge to sound. Depeche Mode always felt ahead of the time, never of it. So a change in the rock trends did little to shake the band's popularity. Depeche Mode did, however, infuse more guitar and aggression into their 1993 album. Perhaps in response to grunge's impact at the time, the album's high point was Walking in My Shoes, a moody, sinister track that called out society's hypocrisies. Again, the individual's decision here to inject their own personal subjective views as to the meanings of these songs I find rather amusing. That being said, I agree with their choice. However, I think a strong case could certainly have been made relating to In Your Room, which is just an incredible anthem, epic in nature, highlighting some of Alan Wilder's best work with the band. Ultimately, I still would default to Walking in My Shoes in this case. Ultra, 1987. They chose It's No Good. It's a minor miracle Depeche Mode even made it to their ninth studio album. Alan Wilder, who'd been a part of the group since '82, quit before recording, citing increased personality clashes with the band. Meanwhile, Dave Gahan was at the height of his heroin addiction and suffered a near-fatal overdose in '96. His experience both in addiction and rehab fueled some of Depeche Mode's darkest work, even by their standards. While Ultra is another thoroughly impressive LP. The standout track is It's No Good, Gahan's distinctive baritone croons over a propulsive, dare we say sexy synth line that feels both modern and retro all at once. This was tough, because while they went with It's No Good as being the best track off the album, my instinctive reaction was to go with Barrel of a Gun. Immediately, though, Home came to mind, in which case Useless followed closely behind. And again, we're talking about the difference here between best track and your favorite track. I certainly would not have chose It's No Good to be the best track off the album. I think it's probably the most Depeche of Depeche Mode tracks on the album. I'll probably go with my instinctive reaction of Barrel of a Gun, but that, if you want to make an argument for me of Home being the best track on the album, you could probably convince me of that, since that is just one incredible track, an absolutely incredible track, and one that my wife and I actually danced to at our wedding. Exciter 2001, they chose Dream On. For a band so steeped in electronic sounds, stripping away things for an organic approach might seem shocking. Yet that's exactly what Depeche Mode did for their 2001 LP Exciter, with Dream On standing out as the album's strongest track. With a mesmerizing acoustic guitar line, lush vocal harmonies, and atmospheric production, the song showcases a different yet just as engrossing side of the band. I like Dream On. Did not think that it was as strong as everybody seemed to make it, certainly being the lead single on the album and the lead track on the album to boot. I think they would have been better going off with the Dead of Night. Would have been a nice sort of juxtaposition to the overall feel of the album to have it be the album opener the way that it was for the tour. For me, I would have gone with Free Love. I personally don't think that song gets nearly enough attention, and feel that it's really the Enjoy the Silence of Exciter while not being as nearly on par with Enjoy the Silence. That being said, personally, I also think that I Am You is a completely underrated track, and probably the most anthemic of the album, even though it starts off rather quiet. The build on that song I find truly incredible and being a standout. But again, for me, Free Love is, and again, all of this is arguably the best track on that album. Playing the Angel 2005, they unsurprisingly chose Precious. Dave Gahan's voice has never lacked for emotion, but it is arguable at its most vulnerable in this 2005 single. Precious was written by Martin Gore after watching the painful effect of his divorce on his family. Hey, the guy got that right. The result is a raw and heartbreaking tune that ranks among Depeche Mode's strongest post-millennium tracks. And again, I understand the choice. I respect the choice. That being said, I personally would have gone with The Pain That I'm Used to. I think Precious is a very Depeche track, and probably the most Depeche Mode track of that album, much like It's No Good is for Ultra. I just think that A Pain That I'm Used to is a stronger track, and would prefer the band do the album version live than the remix version, even though I enjoy the remix version quite immensely on the live tour. Continuing to work through Ultimate Classic Rock and their best songs off each Depeche Mode album, we arrive at Delta Machine 2013. They went with Soothe My Soul. Not surprising based off of the trend so far of this Ultimate Classic Rock list of songs. Elements of this 2013 single seem familiar, like its compelling rhythm, the engrossing synth parts that echo earlier hits Personal Jesus. Other aspects, however, feel fresh and new, like the blues-inspired Call and Repeat that is featured throughout Soothe My Soul. The result is another solid entry in the band's unrivaled catalog. And again, I was not surprised at all by this particular choice from this writer. That being said, I would not have chosen Soothe My Soul. I personally would go with Broken. which I would have liked to have seen as a single. I think it's the strongest track off of Delta Machine. It's not an album that I visit very often, but when I do, I'm often struck at how the album sucks me in. I don't find a desire to continue to listen to it over and over again once I complete it, but again, it seems like every once in a while I revisit this album, and I find myself enjoying it thoroughly. But again, talking about the strongest tracks on the record, Soothe My Soul is just a very typical Depeche Mode song. And I missed one in the midst of all of this, didn't I? Holy cow. How did I jump forward and do that? So my apologies. You're all probably going, where in the world did Sounds of the Universe go, John? I scrolled too far on the page. That's where it went. I can hear Matt right now going, hey, so stop writing your emails. I know I missed an album, and it came before Delta Machine. Sounds of the Universe, 2009. They went with Wrong. Martin Gore once referred to this 2009 single as probably as close to R&B as we're ever going to sound. He said that? Really? Kind of reminds me when he said that they created prog rock, or somebody had told him that they created progressive rock with Spirit. Okay. I'm not sure how Wrong sounds like R&B, but anyway. They go on to say, while we don't hear much of Marvin Gaye or Alicia Keys' influence in Wrong, all right, I agree, it's certainly an attention-grabbing track. The driving synth line is menacing and aggressive, a feeling emphasized by Dave Gahan's fierce vocals. The frontman sounds like he's spitting venom as he belts out his ruminations of life's mistakes. So, all right, I have a different pick. I do agree with them. This is probably the best track off of Sounds of the Universe. However, it's also, unlike some of the other picks, specifically Soothe My Soul and Dream On and It's No Good being the most Depeche tracks of those albums, this is probably the one track that sticks out from not sounding like the rest of the album. If push came to shove, I probably would have preferred Perfect. I think that is an amazing track that I wished they had done live. I also am probably one of the few, and feel free to agree or disagree with me, In Sympathy is an incredibly strong track as well. I think Sounds of the Universe really flies under the radar. Corrupt is a fantastic track too. But again, if we're talking about best track on the album, probably going to have to agree and go with Wrong. All right, I already did Delta Machine, so you can stop sending off those emails. Sorry, I scrolled too far. I'm sorry. I know I probably should have immediately picked up on that, being the guy that does the Depeche Mode podcast, but we're all allowed to make mistakes on occasion. If you've ever heard my Monday through Friday radio show, you know that's the case. Spirit, 2017, they went with Going Backwards. The opening song on Depeche Mode's 2017 LP Spirit is a harsh and pointed analyzing of modern society. Okay, I'll give it to you. We're going backwards, turning back our history, going backwards, piling on the misery Dave Gahan sings on the tune's chorus. His words serving as both a lament on the world's condition and a call to action for change. I actually agree with this pick. I do think it's the best track on the album. I would rephrase it a little bit with relation to the list and be the strongest track on the album. But that's also probably a category in and of itself. I think best, strongest, and favorite, you could actually do 3 different categories. But for Spirit, I think it fits the bill, going backwards and can be the strongest and best. Now, I know that there are certainly arguments to be made of Cover Me. I do love that song as much as the next person. It also feels a bit like half a song, in that the second part of the album, we get an instrumental. I think it's one of the things that Dave doesn't do great in terms of lyric writing. They seem to kind of stretch thin. Speak to Me is that way. I would have liked to have seen Cover Me perhaps being credited with Martin's help in terms of the songwriting and expanding that song out to something that was more fully fleshed out. Speak to Me is the same way. I felt lyrically it's a little bit thin. Both those songs are very, very similar in the way that they're structured. My personal pick would have been Poison Heart. I think Poison Heart is the best track on the album and possibly the strongest. But that also ends up being my favorite too, so that's where my subjectivity comes into play as well. Which brings us to Memento Mori 2023, in which case Ultimate Classic Rock chose Ghosts Again. Writing. The death of founding member Andy Fletcher hung over Depeche Mode's 2023 album, Memento Mori. Though the band's noted the album's themes of mortality and death were already in place before his passing, they took on heavier meaning in the wake of the loss. That weight is felt on Ghosts Again, a gorgeous yet thought-provoking reflection of the impermanence of life. And I agree. It's also my favorite track on the album as well. And I think that it is the best track on the album, and I've made no secret of my love of Ghost Again. I think it's as strong a track as Enjoy the Silence. And if you have not gone and listened to those two tracks back to back, you are certainly, in my opinion, doing yourself a massive disservice because they flow together incredibly. All right, I want to hear from you. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Leave a comment on YouTube. Next week, I'm going to give you a bit of homework. So you can send me your list for the best track off of each Depeche Mode album. But next week, I've already got it planned, and perhaps you can get in ahead of the curve because I plan on going through the live physical releases, starting with Devotional. So I want to personally rank the physical releases, starting with Devotional. If you want to throw The World We Live in Live in Hamburg in the mix, feel free. I only am not including it in my list because we haven't had a proper release of that since the VHS tape. So if you still have a VHS player and you still watch it on VHS, then I'll give it to you as that being a proper release. But since that hasn't been released on DVD or Blu-ray, officially I'm leaving it off the list. So next week I will give you my ranking of the live physical releases. All right. I was on vacation, but I do have a listener feedback to get to. Hi, John. Just finished the latest podcast and thought about time to finally write in. This is Rob Wim Penney from Yorkshire, England. I might ramble on a bit here, but I'm sure you can snip it. No, I'm going to read the whole thing. So I think we're the same age, 52, just turned 52 on July 8th. Going off your shows, struggled to find via Google and can't see you on Wiki. I'm guessing you're not a U.S. beach volleyball star. No, I'm not. Thank you very much. I'm a news talk show host. I discovered DM in 85 as a quiet, snotty teen through a guy who was new to our school. We became best buddies, which was amazing as he was so cool and I was so under the radar. His parents were well off and lived in a huge house. On my many visits there, he would show me his collection of Mode vinyl. Many 12-inch greats, Just Can't Get Enough, New Life, Meaning of Love, Everything Counts, Get the Balance Right. I was blown away and soon after bought my first record on cassette of the singles 81 to 85, catching up in the U.S. From then on, I was hooked. Black Celebration got daily play on repeat, and I started wearing more black to suit. No one else at school, other than my newfound friends, seemed to understand my love of the band. Unfortunately, my friend went on his own way. He was too cool to hang with me long term. But I will always be eternally grateful for him passing on the DM baton to me. I've tried to find him on social media over the years just to thank him. Sadly, no avail. It took me a while to find your podcast, but being not the best tech savvy, even when I started listening to pods through the pandemic. But now I look forward to every Thursday. Memento Mori has been one of their best pieces of work in years. Songs of Faith and Devotion, in my opinion, still my favorite, period. I've seen every tour since Violator, but have to say Memento Mori was one of the best. Despite having advanced in years, Dave looked fresher and more energized than ever and seemed to be genuinely enjoying himself at the shows in Twickenham and Manchester. As customary to each London show, I took my sister, 7 years younger. She's become an honorary fan too, probably from years of subconsciously listening to tunes from out my bedroom, and is in love with Dave. I'm probably more devoted to them now than any time. Been buying all the albums on vinyl, lots of books, including the Mary Valley 101 and AC from and a ACDM from Anton Corbijn. From many other bucket list items that came out of the pandemic, along with Memento Mori release, inspired me to finally get some tattoos at just turning 50. The bird girl from Walking in My Shoes and the iconic bong speaker symbol. Those would have been my two choices, along with the Violator Rose. Hungry for more. So whether they come out with new material or not in the future, they'll be forever in my heart and the soundtrack to my life, and have one of the best, if not the best, back catalogs and evolution stories in music. Keep up the great work and keeping us up to date. Regards, Rob. Thank you very much, Rob, for the email. I greatly appreciate it. All right. Guess what? That wraps up the show this week. I hope you're having a fantastic summer. I also hope that if you like to read science fiction, you'll check out my science fiction space opera series. Set in the future, where air and space flight culture has replaced car culture, it is inspired in part by Depeche Mode. Inspired? I don't know why I had an accent there. Inspired. Life in the so-called space age, the world we live in, and life in general, Depeche Mode plays a large part in the underlying themes of the story. Love, lust. Main character himself is a massive Depeche Mode fan. In the future of 2170 time, the music of the 80s through 2000s is nostalgic and popular among the characters of the story. It does feature references to Depeche Mode, both direct and indirect, while telling an exciting science fiction space opera story. While Earth faces its end, the fight to rule the stars begins in EMBARK, 7 books in all in the series, when Taft Guardia agrees to help fellow hotshot starfighter pilot Keitha Morrow investigate a cryptic message from her late aerospace engineer father. They embark on a mission to uncover the truth behind her father's mysterious death and a looming planet-wide industrial catastrophe. With rival mega corporations D-Corp and Enercon on the brink of war during the global evacuation, Taft and Keitha must race to uncover the key to saving humanity and each other from annihilation before it's too late. Head on over to Amazon.com and search for EMBARK, E-M-B-A-R-K, and Jon Justice. If you like your science fiction to be epic, filled with some Depeche Mode, romance, a lot of really cool technology, and action, EMBARK is perfect for you. I wrote all 7 books in the series for adults, but it's great for ages and appropriate for ages 11 plus. By the way, each book can be written as a single solo story. There's enough in the prologue to get you up to speed of what's happening, so if you happen to look through the series of books, and one of the stories seems more appealing than another, since each of the stories tends to be themed individually. The first story is a bit of a apocalyptic tale. The second one is a heist. Third is kind of a space opera political thriller. 4 is this comedy survival one-off story that leads to book 5, which is a classic sort of young adventure story. And then you have a noir tale leading into Battle Planet, the final book in the series, which is kind of all-out war. Pick up EMBARK Book 1 today, though. Available on Amazon.com, and again, search for EMBARK and Jon Justice. Thank you so much for checking out the episode. I look forward to hearing from you. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. I hope wherever you are happy, you are healthy, and you are safe. I'll talk to you next week. Bye.
Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening